She's an investment banker turned best-selling author. Her latest novel, The Hope Factory, paints an accurate picture of the beauty, the chaos, and complexity of modern India. She truly is a master storyteller. Ladies, Lavanya Sankaran. So how are you doing?
Fantastic.
So Lavanya, you have a really interesting story. And I want to start with, you come from a family of very strong women. And I would love to know, if that influenced your decisions and your path.
Absolutely. In the first place, I had a mother who was an exceptional achiever. She did some amazing things in her life, which included being one of the first South Asian women to go to the Wharton Business School. She was an amazing consultant and all of these things. But the lesson I got from her was that being a woman meant achieving exceptional heights professionally and also being a completely involved mother. So I always assumed that that's
possible.
Not just possible, I thought that was the norm.
Right.
I think back to my grandmother, who was, I guess for me, the first storyteller who I knew, who would tell amazing stories to her grandchildren in her lap, put us to sleep, engage us. And I had no idea when I was a child how difficult that is. But I never thought about it when I was a kid. And then when I grew up, I learned her story, which is she loved to tell stories, and she came from a very highly cultured family in which music and art and were sort of very key aspects. But she married into a family where these things were not equally highly regarded, So when my grandmother got married, she would write stories, okay? But she could never tell anyone about them. So what she would do, actually, she would write them once a month when the young girls of that family had their monthly menstrual flow. They were sent away into a separate room called the Duram room. And this gave them maybe 3 to 4 days of, privacy and rest from their point of view, and a lack of contamination from the rest of the house point of view. Yeah, very thrilling. But my grandmother dealt with this in the most interesting way, because she didn't sit there thinking pious thoughts or praying or whatever it is they were supposed to do in there. She wrote stories. And then she would tuck them underneath her mattress.
I love that story.
And she would leave it there for the next girl who went in there. They would pull this out like contraband and sit there reading this stuff, and then waiting for her next cycle so that she could go there and write more and tuck it in. It's such an amazing story, until the day somebody sneaked on her. One of her sisters-in-law, one of her husband's sister, sneaked to her mother. All her stories were swept out and burned.
It's crazy.
The fact is, she never really wrote after that. And her entire storytelling ability kind of came down to what she could offer her grandkids.
But clearly, it lives through you now. I
think it lives through my aunt. I think it lives through me. But that aspect of her, of being very responsible and yet having that streak of rebellion, I think that kind of is the hallmark of the women of my family in some way, which is they're terribly responsible about their responsibilities. They don't kind of spend too much time catering to social rules. And I love that. I think that is the best inheritance I have.
Love it. So you had a very interesting journey from investment banking to writing. Tell me about how did that happen? Tell me about your investment banking days and what it left you with.
Investment banking was what I did after college, not because I thought investment banking was what I was meant to do. This was, at the end of the 80s, all the smart kids who were doing their undergraduates in the US looked at investment banking as something that was attractive to do.
It was very elite. It's still...
It was elite, but it also had this other amazing quality, which when you're a student coming out of India on 100% scholarship, as I was, it had the quality of paying bills. Right. But here's what I learned from doing that stint with investment banking. One is I learned to work incredibly hard. If you can work a 100-hour week doing something that you're not really fond of, you can do anything. You can do anything. And then the other really bizarre thing that investment banking taught me, which I never expected, taught me how to proofread. Because every offer document that goes out has to be proofread a zillion times. The proofreading is a skill set I use till today, which is, I mean, my eye can spot a mistake at 100 paces, and I'm very unforgiving. So, so that was the investment banking journey, but the writing didn't happen with any kind of clarity.
What, did you have this big moment when you quit your investment banking job to be a writer? What was your big move? Do you think you were, following your heart and not your mind? What?
Look, the heart versus mind issue is something here's my little wisdom of the day, which is that when you discover the thing that you are put on this earth to do, that is a moment when both your heart and your mind intersect. You need the passion that your heart brings, but then you need to bring your best game out, and only your mind can bring that for you. You need to bring hard work, discipline, rationality, logic. You need to examine the issue from every angle. You need to, you need to connect heart, mind, stomach, all the way down to your reproductive organs. And then when you're doing that, then you're in the zone. Then you're in the zone.
Now that you've reached your goal, you've got best-selling books, novels that are out. Now that you're looking back, what would you say were your first important steps?
So I decided to write, but I couldn't commit to it completely. So I'd write at night, I'd write on the weekends.
You moved, and where were you geographically?
At this point, I was back in India.
Okay.
Yeah, so with my one true love. Okay. But the writing didn't go well initially. In fact, I have some of that writing. And when I look at it, gosh, it's awful. But then one day, it fell into place. And that was actually 6 weeks after my daughter was born. And she was asleep on the carpet next to me. And I had my laptop open, and I was sitting next to her. And then I wrote. And I flipped the laptop open, and I began to write. And then I put 2 or 3 sentences down, and I went, okay, this is it. Because right there was my voice. It was a genuine, vibrant literary voice that was all my own. That was a journey that took 5 years from those first sentences to the red carpet.
Tell me more about that journey.
Well, that was, again, gosh, this is not an inspirational story, right? I mean, I didn't have any clarity. I had a lot of desire. I had a lot of hard work.
Were you telling people that you're writing? Or?
For the first 3 years, I didn't tell anyone except my husband. And then I told my mom. And then for a long while, that was it, because I was shy about it. This was such a vulnerable process. I was diving so deep into myself. This didn't have any glamorous job title, It was nothing. It was just an idea in the air.
And it's so personal. You're putting
so intensely personal
out there.
Yes, absolutely. But I worked at it, and at some point, I hit that moment when I went from those first clear sentences, when I got 2 stories, and I said, these stories work. And then I flew with them. I showed them to some writing friends in the US. They said, okay, it's time for you to go to a writer's workshop to meet agents. So I flew myself to Hawaii, not to enjoy the beach, but to go to something odd, okay, called the Maui Writers Workshop. And the second I get there, I find that it's a place that is full, that's meant for writers to connect with agents, but all the writers were romance writers and mystery writers. And I sat there kind of clutching my 2 stories from India going, what am I doing here? But it turned out, luckily, it was a mistake that made good. Because all the agents who were speaking there, they also represented literary fiction, which is where I came in. And so I went to speak to one of them. She was good enough to take a couple of my stories. And by the next day, she'd actually talked about my writing to a few other agents there. So other agents were beginning to contact me. And so I was in this really cool position at the end of 3 days of actually, having 5 agents interested in me and actually needing to interview them.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I signed with one, and then she told me to go write the rest of the book. So I came back to India, and I spent 2 years doing that, finishing up the book, and then sent it back to her. And then she said, well, nobody buys short stories, but let's see what happens. And then she called me a couple of weeks later, and she said, you better come out here. So I flew out to New York, and then it turns out that there were 9 publishers interested. There was a 3-day auction, which, of course, I don't know what an auction was, and I don't think auctions normally go the way my auction did, but there were 9 publishers who phoned in with bids. But they didn't all call in together. We were sitting in her office, so the first call came in, and it was the first bid. I was so relieved. I mean, my bowels turned to water, literally, and I was like, yes, thank heavens.
We'll take it.
We'll take it, absolutely. So she just kind of looked at me and she was like, go. Go outside, smoke a cigarette, drink a coffee, go for a walk.
Be cool.
Get out of this room. And then the bids began to come in. But on the second day of the auction, something very bizarre happened, which was you had the big New York blackout, and the entire city lost power.
During your auction.
In the middle of the auction, right? And this was just a few months after 9/11. So I was sitting there in the skyscraper in New York City with an agency that covered 2 floors. One was, the literary agency that represented me. Upstairs, there was the musical part of their agency that represented Britney Spears. And all the agents went, terrorist attack, terrorist attack. Everyone just went crazy. And I was like, no, it's a power cut. I come from India.
Maybe.
I know a power cut. So in the middle of this auction, we're there in a power cut. My agent can't go home. Her assistant can't go home. So they both walked back to my hotel room with me on the Upper West Side. And the 3 of us spent the night together.
So that is the secret. She had to share a room with her agent.
And the agent's assistant. Let's not forget. Yes. But then the next day the calls came in, and then the auction closed 3 days later at, thankfully, a much higher bid than that first one. So I'm glad I was sent out of the room when it came. Yeah.
And you signed a 2-book deal, which...
Yes, and the first book was The Red Carpet, and the second book is The Hope Factory, and they've been incredibly patient. The first Red Carpet took me 5 years to write. They didn't know that. The Hope Factory took me 6 years to write, and they've been incredibly patient.
It's wonderful to see Bangalore represented like this. You don't see that too much. And, tell us about the process of how you develop these complex characters and why you spoke so much about India and how it is today.
Well, India was the inspiration for me. I mean, from the get-go, that's what I wanted to capture in The Red Carpet, which was this world that wasn't about mythology or poverty, but it was, or about history, which are really valid India stories. But I wanted to capture the India that I was living in,
Which is so multi-layered, and, I think about this all the time, too, which is, I think, why I really appreciated
it's changing so fast. It's a very young India. It's urban. It's a mixture of languages. It's a mixture of, thousands of years of history. It's terribly modern and terribly ancient. We're living in this very sort of remarkable world. And for a writer, it's such a gift, because all you have to do is just pick up your pen, and India will tell you its stories, and that's wonderful. But I wanted to go for a much more complex story in The Hope Factory, which is, I think, it is a book that touches on society. It also looks at politics and economics.
Right.
Everything that makes up our multi-layered world.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I'm not going to let you go yet. I don't know if you know what you're in for. It's called a Quickie with Namu Kini. Mojito or martini?
Martini.
Paper books or ebooks?
Paper. Yeah.
Trekking in the Himalayas or chilling in Goa?
I'd like to say Himalayas, but I'd actually choose Goa. So.
Fish or steak?
Steak.
If you weren't a writer, you'd be a?
I'd be a lawyer. Words.
When you were little, you wanted to grow up and be a?
Writer.
Writer, awesome. Would you host the Diwali party with prawns or the veg thali lunch?
Prawns.
Those of you who've read the book know what I'm talking about. Okay, Indian Standard Time or American Standard Time?
American Standard Time.
Yeah, baby.
On time. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lavanya. Lovely to have you.
My pleasure.